the students shut their screens off. And so thanks all for coming. I think it's recording. It says it's recording. All right, so we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us for our Friday Art Lunch Bunch. I'm Frank Korb, teacher at Fort Atkinson High School here in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. And today what we've got coming is Nicole Shaver. She is a, I guess, mixed media artist, a painter, sculptor. Nicole grew up along Lake Michigan, where she skipped rocks and watched fishermen gut salmon as a child. Largely inspired by ideas of place and belonging, she researches geographical sites and employs them as metaphorical compasses to navigate the space between reality and fantasy, the banal and the sublime. Nicole received her Bachelor of Fine Art from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and her Master's of Fine Art from the University of Iowa. She's attended artist residencies in Colorado, Iceland, North Carolina, Ohio, Portugal, Vancouver, and Wisconsin, while exhibiting widely throughout the United States and Scandinavia. Shaver is committed to the artistic growth in Port Washington, volunteering for the Port Washington Arts Council and its Gallery 224. She's an artist in residence at Studio 224, the council's collaborative printmaking and photography space. She maintains a painting studio on Franklin Street in Port Washington, plans and markets community events for Port Washington Main Street Incorporated, and bartends when permitted. And Nicole's statement: I endeavor to understand place by engaging fully with its material value, elevating banal human detritus and local geology to the artistic practice. I'm interested in the intersection between the natural and the man-made, objects that seem otherworldly and can catalog the growth of our planet. I record this investigation of the Anthropocene, I don't know if I've got that word right, but we'll stick with that. Excellent. Our current man-made geological era through image making, employing interdisciplinary media, installation, printmaking, photography, and sculpture. My collected specimens, historical research, and genuine spatial interaction become semiotic compasses to help me navigate the undiscovered identities of place. From these discoveries, I create visual landscapes that combine reality with impression, providing a framework that emphasize with our transitioning Earth. So we'll just introduce around, welcome everybody. Here's Nicole Shaver. I am going to go back to the slideshow. Thanks for joining us today. And I will just let you walk us through the slideshow as you see fit.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Bet, thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I know there's a lot of $10 words in that artist statement. Anthropocene, the word you sort of were stuck on, is the geological age that scientists are calling our current period right now. So when in the future, if we have one, geological scientists will be able to see our mark in the earth quite literally when they go down for core samples. They'll see a layer of plastic and all of the things that we've been putting into the earth. And I'm really interested in sort of that idea of humans creating their own geology, their own rocks, their own record of their daily lives through material.
Okay.
I like to start off my lectures with a sort of comic because I feel like art is really exhausting and it takes a lot out of you, but it is so much of an outlet, and it's such a really great untapped resource. If you haven't carved that special creative time out for yourself, you should find a way to really enjoy that, whether it's writing or photography or painting or whatever. It's how you record your life and how you take in the world, and I think it's really important.
Great cartoon. Did you draw that?
No, I didn't. It's actually from it's called the 10-Pound Baby comic from the Badger Herald from when I was at school at Madison. I just really love the artist.
Yeah, I have to steal that one myself.
Yeah. And frankly, we're kind of talking about this before we started the lecture, but I think it's really important to almost make yourself a manifesto about why you make art and why it's important to you. And I found Hans Hofmann's book, Searching for the Real, quite early in making art, and I feel like it's really important to how I take in the world and how that sort of manifests into a creative thing.
And this is
And
his manifesto?
yeah, this is an image from his book that I've taken down and shared quite widely because I think it's just nice to have a visual of what exactly could be happening in this like regurgitation of taking in things from around you and bringing it into the studio practice and almost putting it into a blender and see what comes out.
Oh, this is great.
And this next one is kind of along the same vein. This is a great quote that I love. A city is like a person. If we don't establish a genuine relationship with it, it remains a name, an external form that soon fades from our minds. To create this relationship, we must be able to observe the city and understand its peculiar personality, its its spirit, its identity, the circumstances of its life as they evolved through space and time. And that goes into just a daily practice of like walking and taking in and just being in a place without any sort of needed outcome. And sometimes that's really hard to sort of carve out of your life, this time of just wandering, and having that as a daily practice can be really wonderful because it's, as you see things daily, it changes and the landscape around you changes, and what you had for lunch and what how many hours of sleep, all that affects the way that you see. And so returning to that same place daily can be really opening for how you sort of take in the world.
That's great.
And that's so much of my practice as well. So I guess I'll start in Iowa because this is where I sort of really honed in on this idea of taking in the real and understanding the world through my art making. I did my master's at the University of Iowa. And I honestly, even growing up in Wisconsin, I really had never made a point to go to Iowa. I didn't see a reason to go to Iowa, but I got this really great offer to go there, and the school there is amazing. But I found myself sort of at this crossroads where I didn't really understand this landscape around me and felt like it was dead and barren, and there wasn't much for me to really take from this. And so I sort of saw this as a challenge to find what is that diamond in the rough here? What could be that jewel that I sort of take into my studio to help me better understand where I am, quite literally. It's like the artistic practice can really be grounding in that way. So I found myself really like just going out into the land and being there, and I befriended, like my best friend had a corn farm down the road, and I literally started taking things from her farm, corn, back to the studio, to even just in a sort of a madness to try to save the landscape or make it mine. I would bring it back to the studio and then sort of let the metamorphosis with the art materials happen naturally. And so that brings me to my thesis show, and sort of the didactic that I gave for this show was printed on these pieces of corn husk paper that I made. So I blended up the corn that I brought back from this farm and created with the corn husks this paper pulp and started making sheets of paper. So this didactic sort of gave me a springboard for what I was interested in and how I was taking in that land. This quote says, "Iowa is the heartland of the heartland. Its greatest single force is dirt, fat dirt. Out of that soil each year, more wealth is produced than all the gold mines in the world. Gently the land rises and falls, not broken into steep hills, but always tilting its fertile face to the sun." And just finding this quote was like, wow, all of this death around me is not, it's not that at all. It's with death comes new life, and cultivating what I see is, that's where the real gems are. And a friend sent this to me and I was like, wow, everything I've been working on is so clear now. So you can go to the next slide, Frank. This will be my thesis show where I created these almost banner-like or tapestries on this corn husk paper. And on those sheets that I created, these are about 4 by 8 feet, and Iowa is amazing for paper making. So they really are just like championed that whole creative process for me. But are these images of the landscape, either printed or painted or all kinds of different mark making. I'm sort of manic about never really doing the same kind of thing and really being challenged in the way that I create an image, but being loyal to that landscape the whole time. So it's photographs that I had been taking or things that were turned into relief printmaking. Any questions?
Are each of these one piece of paper, or are these papers that have been put together? Because a 4 by 8 sheet of paper is huge.
It is. And so the ones that are hanging on the wall are the corn husk paper, and I had a very willing helper to show me how to make those sheets, and it's an amazing process that takes multiple people to create. And that's another thing that I sort of want to emphasize, is that art doesn't happen in a vacuum, and the more people that are involved sometimes can really generate work that you didn't know you could make on your own. And sort of involving more and more people in the process can be really vulnerable sometimes, but the outcomes are just amazing when you have other people that know more than you or have a different set of tools.
Yeah, and I think as an educator, these are the kinds of the things that I'm struggling with right now, and I've got a feeling students are struggling with too, because, as you said, you had people around you to help. We don't have people around us right now. I mean, there's a handful of people out there who've got sisters or brothers that they can work with, or family members. But, for me, the teacher, it's tough to not be over the top of a kid's shoulder or an artist's shoulder and help them see something that they're not seeing, or being that person who knows just a little bit more than they do about these processes. So it's a really great point to make, and these are great pieces. And if any of you have questions or comments throughout the process here, just unmute yourself, chime in, and ask, and we'll go from there. So great, thank you.
So then in my thesis show, there were 2 pieces that were made out of the corn husks themselves, not into paper. And I sort of weaved them together and created them with this matte medium. Mm-hmm. So on my studio floor, I made almost a mold making box and was pouring layers and layers of this matte medium, and these corn husks were weaved in, and it's this like amazing texture. It's almost like a fruit roll up. It's just like, wow, this is like really crazy. And a lot of my work you'll see has this hot pressed foil on it, which is this metallic material that you can add using a heat gun, and it comes in all different kinds of colors, like Pokemon cards, that like holographic. That's how they make that, is that foil. So it comes in all kinds of colors. And I have a lot of questions about why I sort of use those metallics. And for me, it's sort of burnishing the material itself and making it a memorial or a sort of a relic of some sort, almost like a church where something banal is elevated to the sublime by all these gold filigraries. And there's a lot of reasons why people are attracted to metallics too, and that goes back to the idea of water and having that shimmer. There's a very innate need for humans and why we are attracted to that shimmer, and it goes back to water. Yeah, very basic.
That's great. Okay, so is that middle section of this piece just the corn husk, or do you have metallic throughout the whole piece?
It's just, the gold is on the outsides, and then it goes from the silver, and then the middle is just the natural
Okay.
pieces.
Wow.
After I finished, actually, this was in the middle of my senior year of getting my master's. One of my friends went to do an artist residency in Iceland, and she said, "Do you want to come visit?" And I said, "Well, yeah. How many times do you get a chance to do that?" And this town that I was staying in was 700 people, very small. And it's in this fjord town, which means there are mountains on either side and just water out to the ocean.
Wow.
And this town is just amazing. It's like this whole hub of creativity, this town of like 3 different artist residencies and 700 people. It's amazing. And they even rumor that both those mountains on either side are filled with crystals inside, and that's why there's such creative energy in this town.
Mm-hmm. Did you find any as you were digging?
I took home a lot of rocks, I'll tell you that.
I think we see some of those later on.
Yeah, I came back from that. I was only there for 2 weeks for my first time. I've been to Iceland 3 different times, and I'll get to the different projects that sort of have come out of that. But this piece was a 50-foot painting on this sort of translucent canvas. And on both sides are these projections of those mountains. And I was sort of feeling like I wanted an encounter just like I felt in Iceland that was almost religious in a way. That was sort of like this encounter that was so amazing. Thank you, Katie. And this was another, like everything that I make is never the same process. And that's really why I like making art, because I can do whatever I want in a way. And this was sort of done with different layers of almost gossamer, they call this fabric. And you can make a almost translucent gesso. So the gossamer becomes a primed canvas, but it maintains this translucency. So you can see that it's done on both sides, and you can see the mountains kind of coming and going.
What kind of canvas were you able to find for this piece?
I created it. It's different pieces of fabric together.
Okay.
Using this fabric called gossamer.
Okay. Wow.
What is gossamer? What is that typically used for?
It's almost like a tool, kind of, but smaller mesh in a way.
Huh.
It's used a lot of time for decorative things. Okay. Honestly, we used it when I was decorating for prom back in high school. Okay. It's a very cheap material, but it has this beautiful translucency, and I was able to find it in some really interesting colors and textures, like that purple that you see on the left. That's all just a section of fabric. Wow. So there was kind of this moment where the drawing and the backing itself sort of came and went.
Wow.
And then it was anchored on both sides with these like stacks of geology that were taken from Iceland. Mm-hmm. as a grounding or a total reference to the ground itself.
And you brought back these rocks and then cut them.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of the projects that I do sort of come and go in different installations, and sure. Because I'm an artist, I can do whatever I want anyways, and I sort of recycle some pieces. Like the piece on top is actually a piece of cast aluminum. And this rock you'll actually see again in another piece I'm going to show you. Okay. Came from the Iowan landscape. It's a total round, they call it a glacier erratic. So that means that the glaciers came through, plopped it, and then receded. So it's a rock from someplace else, and that sort of was really poetic to me, that it didn't belong where you found it.
Wow.
And it came very round, and my friend gave it to me, and we cut it in half thinking it was a geode, and there's nothing inside of it. And that sort of was a beautiful sentiment too.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Wisconsin, obviously, and was at grad school in Iowa, and I found myself driving back and forth through Wisconsin and Iowa a lot, and noticing the difference in the geology right along the Mississippi, and that's called the Driftless Area. So that's where the glaciers never came down to really level the land. Where, you know, Wisconsin and Iowa and Illinois and Minnesota being really flat and prairie land, except for right around the Mississippi, we get all this beautiful outcrop, and that's because it really wasn't flattened. So I thought this was like almost like a Bermuda Triangle or something in between the person that I was and the person that I was studying to be, or something. I just found it like a really poetic place that was suddenly like my new place to investigate. And so out of that project came this installation, which was in New York, following my master's year.
Oh, sorry. Getting away from me.
That's right. And so I thought, you know, we're going to have this big show in New York. What should I do? Let's send the heaviest thing I can think of and the most fragile thing I can think of. And I sent 2,000 hand-polished pieces of petrified wood and Lake Superior agate that I had harvested. And this is another one of those projects where it wouldn't have happened had I not had help from somebody else. And that's sort of reaching out of curiosity and out of just like trying to share that artistic practice with somebody. So that glacier erratic I was talking about before, I thought, you know, I got to get this thing cut. Where can I get this cut? I'm on a university. I go to the geology department, and I, you know, through a series of conversations, found myself in this basement talking to a geologist who also never talked to anybody else. He was always in the lab. So he was really excited. An artist is coming down there with this new project, and he helped me cut that glacial erratic with a diamond blade. Wow. And then we started working just out of my own curiosity. I'm like, can I just hang out with you and see what you do? And so he helped me show me how to hand polish all of these stones, and we broke apart the petrified wood, and just was an amazing sort of relationship that just came out of curiosity and investigating. And it's just like you have to have conversations with people and bring them into the practice, because there's infinite possibilities that way.
That's fantastic.
And so this piece was just sort of like that poetic idea about the Driftless Area, about sort of weighing that place of where I was and where I was going. So I finished my master's at Iowa, and then I came back to Port Washington in Wisconsin here, and sort of was feeling like I don't really want to be here. I still want to go and have an artistic practice and try to understand a new place. So I found a residency in Fredericktown, Ohio, that's ran by a couple, and they bought a 100-year-old furniture factory, and they sort of just like left everything around and cleared out this warehouse, and they bring in a few artists every summer, and they're just like, it's a big playground for you to investigate. And I was sort of walking around this property and found this big cropping of bricks, and I'm like, wow, this is perfect for me. This is the geology of that place that's left behind. And I really started using those bricks in a lot of different ways, and just restructuring them. And so they all started as that like big pile in the back. And I started, you know, stacking them up very neatly. I put them in this big circle that you can see left there, which ended up being a big tower.
Wow.
And it's just like a practice where I realize that a lot of things are a failure. And so to make a lot of attempts, it's like, oh, maybe the one thing will come out of this that will have some resonance in a few years or something. And to be reworking that same material is really important to me. I used to tell my students, you know, put it back through the blender, you know, see it through a new media or a new place. It all changes the context. And I think that every time you put it through the blender, that material in a way starts to be more pure or something. It comes from me in a more genuine place, because my hand is so much more involved in the making. So that ring that you see, you can go to the next slide, Frank. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the structure created, but I created this big tower out of all those bricks, I think 1,000 bricks, and put my camera up through the bottom of it and started shooting this video just of the sky. And it ended up being this portal that was like so endemic to that place and those materials. You can play it, and it just goes on a loop, and it's sort of a meditative piece. And I just think it's like as the time goes on, you see the sun changing the view of the bricks around. This is a shortened version.
Yeah.
But like the sun you would see going around the bricks and illuminating in a different way, almost like a moon.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up projecting this piece back into the furniture factory on the wall. So it really felt like a portal to some other place, into a fantasy of that place. And I really started to, like, every time I'm moving these bricks, I'm noticing all of the intricacies, how they're stamped. Some of them are made by people from the jail at the time.
Wow.
Each brick is special in its own way.
This is very reminiscent of James Turrell. Has a piece similar to this. The piece that I think of is on a university, and it's a big box. It's a big room, and it's very plain on the inside, but the ceiling is just a square. It's just a big hole cut in the ceiling, and the premise is to sit on the benches around the outside of it and just take in what's coming through that space. So this is really great.
Yeah, I've seen that piece before. I think it's at the Brooklyn Museum, maybe somewhere.
Okay.
Or PS1. That's a really powerful piece.
Yeah. Oh, and there's some wow.
Yeah, so like no project is really ever finished to me, and it's just like seeing it through a different lens. You know, I started taking photos then up through there. I'm like, wow, this is such a great form. And this is just a screenshot of my phone, you know, having taken all those photos. And I'm like, wow, there's something really interesting and formal about this. And it starts to be burrows into something, or, you know, something is like really resonant and aesthetically interesting about this to me. And it's not something I would normally paint or draw, but it's sort of, it all comes out of just like moving and being aware of what you're looking at.
That's phenomenal.
Thank you. So then I thought, you know, let's move 1,000 bricks by hand. Terrible idea. So I started moving the bricks back into the furniture factory from the yard. I'm like, wow, I have to save all of these for some reason and start to make them, you know, put them through the blender again, put them through my own metamorphosis. And I started to do the hot press foil, the gold leafing on these bricks, and sort of was starting to make this golden yellow brick road or something to understand this idea of home. At the time, they were voting on the Dreamers Act, which has to do with immigrants in sort of having their citizenship through their parents that were smuggled here, and that was pretty personal to me. I have a friend who's a dreamer, and I was at this residency and thinking about ideas of home and how can you sort of fill that void or understand this idea of home through material, and what happens when it's sort of taken away or deteriorating. So this idea of, sorry, Frank?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's so amazing what one can do with all of these found materials. You know, we're in a point now as art educators and as artists who are trapped in our own homes. You know, it's like, well, my students don't have the acrylic paints that we would normally use, or they don't have, you know, that material that's typically thought of as the artistic material. And it's just so wonderful to see what you're doing with materials you found in a factory, or what we could find if we would all go out into our backyards for a couple of hours and just gather up materials, what kind of wonderful pieces we could come up with. So this is fantastic. Please continue. Sorry.
I was going to ask something, Frank. As I'm listening and watching, I am filing a piece of wood that I found on a walk we took 2 days ago,
Yes.
and assembling earrings that are made from soda cans, all things I'm working on with my students. And so really working with materials that I find along my path in life. So I'm really resonating with the things that you're saying, and also having the ability in the last 6 weeks to slow my life down long enough that I can take a walk and a hike every day, which has been really beautiful to see the world move so slowly, because usually life is at such a quick pace for me that it's winter and then it's spring, and I feel like I've missed the transition, and I'm really seeing it right now and appreciating it. So I'm really resonating with what you're saying. Thank you.
And to that effect, I also sort of, when I'm taking in the world, I do it on a different speed, different, like if you're walking or riding a bike or driving, you're absorbing the world in a different way, and to sort of vary that will vary the way that you observe the world. And there's something about using the materials from that place that has this like genuine feeling for me. It's a different feeling than like using something plastic out of a tube that was manufactured. There's something that's like loyal to that place and my interaction with that place.
Wow.
Yeah, so I ended up going back to Iceland in 2018 for a residency. And this was a really, really special residency. And if anybody has any further questions about doing artist residencies, you can send me some questions. I have a lot to say about the way that that can change your artistic practice in a really beautiful way. And the quarantine thing is kind of almost like a mini residency for us artists. Like your other life is a little bit put on hold, and you can really spend time just being in a place and seeing how that manifests creatively. And so when I was in Skagastrand, Iceland, I was living in this residency that my studio seriously opened up, and I saw that island. And through there is the West Fjords. And right behind this arch in the island is this beautiful mountain that's sort of like the pinnacle of the town. They have a huge pride for this town. There's a big mural for this mountain. And I just thought, but what about this island? Nobody's paying attention to this beautiful island. And I started talking to a lot of locals and learned that it was called Riverbank Rock, the translation for Arbakashtine, which means that it sort of was plopped from the river out there. And I just thought it was this beautiful sentiment, again, almost like the glacial erratic, where it came from somewhere it didn't really belong. And I thought, we have to frame this and sort of champion it. And of course, I'm like, I'm going to make it out of the geology, out of something here. And so I started collecting rocks from around the area, and again, enlisted the help of a lot of people. And that comes from just the excitement of creating something that's community like oriented. I wanted this to be something that was for the community there and would stay there. So
you talk a lot about using or working with other people, and it reminds me of exactly what Christo and Jean-Claude would do. Part of their projects were, just for those of you who don't necessarily know, what they would wrap buildings or drape flags throughout parks or whatnot. Umbrellas, they had thousands of umbrellas across 3 different continents, kind of thing. But part of their whole goal was not so much the finished temporary artwork, but that process that they have to go through. And sometimes it would take them 25 years to get from start to finish. And then the artwork was up for a small period of time, and then it came down and got recycled. So it's wonderful to hear you talk about that community building and working with other people to have these projects happen. It's wonderful to see that cooperation and collaboration.
Yeah, and being at this town was even smaller than the one I was at before. I think 400 people lived here.
Oh my gosh. And
so if you want to find spray paint or a diamond bit in Iceland, it's quite the challenge. There's not a hardware store in this town. There's one grocery store. There's nothing. So you really do have to like ask around town and see who has what kind of tools. And I had a lot of help with this one, but I did drill holes into each one of those rocks, and it took a month and a half.
Wow.
And so what goes through all those rocks is this galvanized steel. So it goes down into both rocks on either side, and you can sort of move the rocks on top or spin them, and it sort of is like an interactive piece. And what's really lovely is that the town loves this piece, and they all take portraits in front of it, and it's the cutest thing. Like, they call it the Lover's Arch.
Oh,
And it's just really beautiful. And because the town is so small, I can follow the hashtag Skagastrand
oh.
and see posts of people that they're taking in front of this arch. And that's really lovely to me, that it's sort of embraced, because there's a risk in doing an installation like this in a town that I'm only in for 3 months, you know, and I'm hoping that they're gonna be well received for this.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so that brings me back to Wisconsin, and I had another artisan residency opportunity with the Land Trust. This is a new program that we started through Gallery 224, where I do a lot of volunteering, and you should look into this, Frank. It's a really great program, or anybody that's interested. Every year, this is the second year that we're doing it right now, and each artisan residence is paired with one of these properties from the Ozaukee County Land Trust. And they own 32 properties around Ozaukee County that are donated. And I put together this proposal to create a sculpture at the Forest Beach Migratory Preserve, which used to be a really well-known golf course. And now it's changed over the last 10 years into this bird and bat conservation center.
Wow.
So I was sort of taking in that place and seeing how like a golf course was sort of transitioning back into this like wildlife prairie. So all the greens and the ponds were starting to get covered in green and algae, and like Mother Nature was taking back over, and this was really fascinating to me. So I started to imagine, you know, what would be an egg like this, maybe metamorphosizing. It's some sort of cross between an egg and a rock, or I'm still not really sure. You know, it's like a fantasy thing. It's something otherworldly that you can't quite put your finger on, but you have this cadence of a lot of things familiar. This rock, this egg, somewhere in between maybe. So I created this piece, and it has these rocks that I collected from Lake Michigan and glitter grout on the bottom, and then it sort of transitions to these glow-in-the-dark stones on top. Wow. So it does glow in the dark at night on the top.
And that's the piece above the word migratory? Right. Okay. Wow. Oh my goodness.
And this takes us to November. I was at another artist residency in Portugal, and I reached out to this residency because of the site that was sort of given to us as access. Right across, if you can see the sort of line across there, that over there is Lisbon. Okay. And so I'm in Barreiro, across the bay there, and it's this industrial town that was creating all kinds of things during the 1930s, and they created all kinds of resins, and it's sort of one of these compounds where they started making one thing, and then they made the bags to put that in, and then they made that and that and that and that, and it's sort of this whole community that was built around this factory, this industrial place. And I was really interested in that whole idea. Once, it's sort of a very interesting history, but that also goes into a lot of my research, is sort of taking in all of that information and having it maybe not well known in the piece, but it has a sort of weight to it. So I was given access to all of these industrial remains, and was really gravitating toward this one site where they created these resin pieces. So I started sort of taking in all this material, and I was like, I'm not sure what I want to do with this. And I brought it back to the studio, which is like a half a mile away. I'm such a madman. I'm like loading up my backpack and, you know, on my bike, bringing all this crap back with me. And I'm like, no, there must be a way that I can sort of like do this with more poetic justice to the place. And I just kept going back there and sort of being around this whole area and where all these remains are. And I found this beautiful site that had the ground foundation still. And I'm like, wow, this is a sculpture park if ever I saw one. They had all these pedestals created. You can go to the next slide, Frank, if you want.
Sure. Oh, wow.
Pedestals like this that were sort of part of the foundation. And I'm like, wow, those are pedestals. And, you know, like 20 of those were inside of this already delineated sort of gallery space amongst all this garbage. And I was like, I need to curate this space and sort of make a meditative place for this chaos.
Yeah,
and a way to elevate those materials. And so I started to curate this space, and I really love this idea of reflecting pools and those Parisian kind of gardens and just being like a meditative space. And of course, it just did beautiful things to those pieces with the reflections. And that was a sort of another happy accident too, because I came back after, you know, days of torrential rain, and there starts to be this pool there. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want. So I plug all the holes I can find around that thing, around the foundation.
Yeah.
And I'm just praying for rain every day. I'm like, fill it up. And it did. And and I just photographed it the way that it is. And that's one of those ephemeral pieces that was just, if you happen to find it, it's a gift to you. And it wasn't advertised and it wasn't maintained. I mean, I'm sure it's destroyed by now, but it was that moment, I think, just for me, maybe to be in that meditative place with those materials and sort of give that location the justice maybe it never had been given.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm sorry, I have to leave now. This has been one of the most incredible experiences.
Thank you, Sharon.
It blows my mind. I have never, ever experienced something like this. I don't even know what to say. I mean, I'm absolutely speechless. Thank you so much for inviting me. I just regret that I have to go. I can't tell you. I have never even imagined all this. My head is just spinning.
Okay,
so,
great.
You are an amazing woman and so creative and so just let's try something new. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'd love to watch you continue to grow and go with your career. So God bless you and take care. Thank you, Frank.
Cheers.
Thanks, Sharon. I'll send you the link to the video.
Oh my goodness, please. Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. I love that woman.
Yeah. Okay, so that brings me to what I've been working on here. I guess, like I said, I've sort of had a crisis about where I grew up or something. There's a distance I give to Port Washington for some reason. I guess it's just I'm used to seeing it or something. And I'm sort of forcing myself to understand my domestic life here in that lens that I give of an artist residency. And I came back from Portugal with a bag, and a plastic bag, and I was like, wow, this is Portugal. This is like their commercial thank you bag. That's that green one in the middle. And I was like, I just have to keep this, you know, for something. And I wanted to maybe create a stone or something out of it. And this is really thinking about that Anthropocene age, you know, plastic as a geological specimen. So I started casting, I have it on here. This is that green one. I started casting the plastic bag inside of another plastic bag with resin, and I would peel it out of the bag and put it back into another bag and do another
Oh my God.
resin on it. So what's really beautiful is that it has these textures of the bag on it itself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about these that are really jewel-like and interesting to me, so I'm making these. You could go to the next slide.
Those are fantastic.
So that's the bag there, and that plastic bag is what I cast it in, and then I really like the idea of them being displayed back into the bag and almost being like a goodie bag, or I'm not sure yet. These are fresh. This is a new kind of work, so I'm still thinking about these.
So you take it out of the external bag and then put it into a new internal bag to pour more resin into.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's just one bag in the inside of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, you just get the textures from being like the bottom of the bag, you know, where
Yeah.
it kind of like all of the plastic settles.
Yeah.
And it just like really is amazing process because it just peels right out of there and has like beautiful textures.
Yeah.
So I've been working a lot with the resin in the studio and creating these sculptures, but also some 2D works about being here in Port Washington, and those are the next works you can go to. Okay. I'm calling them slidescapes. It's like a idea of trying to remember a place through like almost a scientific slide.
Yeah.
This idea of like looking through under a microscope, but I really love this translucency, and that happens a lot in my work too because it involves the space around it. I sort of want the art to be as much around and involved in the space as the one that it's talking about. So this is, yeah, those are on glass or plexiglass. These are images from Iceland that I've been reusing. Nothing is really ever out of reach, and a lot of things come back into the work. I'm sort of compulsively always taking photos, and sometimes that comes into the work and sometimes it just informs the sculpture or is for my own research. But I'm starting to think about these like slidescapes as sort of evidence of this place in between that I'm sort of uncomfortable about remembering or recalling, where there's this disassociation between the real and what I remember it being like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or sort of, elevating of the memory. This is another piece. So that involves some photographs. The two black and white are photographs, and the top one there is a translucent, a photo on transparency, and then those are both cast, all of that is cast into resin. And it's still this idea. This piece is more interesting to me because it's sort of breaking that square frame and sort of recalling more that the liquidness of water. I can't think of a better word for that.
Fluidity.
Fluidity, yeah. But also it's like recalling that space behind it. And I sort of struggled with how to photograph this piece for a lot of reasons, with it being transparent and all of that is really difficult to photograph. But I was like, well, I'll just take it down to the water because I want it to be, you know, recalling that place again. And it just works so much better for me to photograph it this way. And it might not be professional or whatever, but it got to what exactly I wanted it to be, you know.
Wow.
I think this is my last piece I'm going to tell you about. This was a piece that I was preparing for our Marne exhibition, Frank. And I started this in early March, and it's pieces of beechwood that I collected from the beaches around here and started to paint with this gold filigree. Some pieces have those hot pressed foil on it. And I started sort of creating this wreath. And at the time I made it, I'll be honest, I made it just the size that it is so I can get out the door. You know, I measured the door. It's like 7 feet or something, just almost 7 feet. So I'm like, okay, I'll just make it 6 feet wide. And it's like a perfect Vitruvian circle for me to move around. And it's very performative in the way that it's sort of around me. And then it's like one of those things that it's just amazing because it's so exactly what I want to think about right now with the quarantine. It's like 6 feet, 6 feet. Why would that be 6 feet? Of course, now we're thinking about the social distancing, and it's just become a really different context for me now. And it's maybe going to be more performative. Maybe I'll take it off the wall and start interacting with it myself. But like all of these materials sort of being weaved around us in this orbit to protect us or keep others at bay. It's sort of like both. And it's calling towards this like religious crown of thorns too.
Yep.
That's interesting to me. And that like weight and yeah.
Oh, that's
So that's put
wonderful.
together with resin, and it has these like beautiful like drippy crystals on it.
Does the resin hold the piece together, or are they woven together and are just held together by gravity?
It's a little bit of both. The
Okay.
pieces are sort of woven together and then tacked with some industrial glue, and then the resin is sort of poured over the top. There's a lot of layers that have sort of like encased it, and it's pretty strong and like structurally sound. I would love to have this suspended.
Yeah.
honestly.
Oh, that's phenomenal. That's just absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
I hope that as another Marn mentee, we're able to see that sometime in the near future, not the tomorrow future, but not too distant future.
Mhm.
So,
And that's a photo from my studio. It's just down the street. It's a great room for resin to cure, because resin is not the best sort of material to honestly work with, and you should definitely wear a mask when you do it and take the proper precautions. But it has to cure at a certain temperature, so it's kind of a fussy material. And to have a studio that you can like dump and dash, I like to call it, is great, because you don't really want to hang out when it's doing its thing.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Nicole, for joining us. If anybody has any questions, I see we've got one of our incredible artists who might very well, if she let her sister in. Do you have any questions at all for Nicole? Now is a good time. And if not, that's fine too.
You can reach out, of course, if something is burning and you don't want to ask in front of everybody. Please send me an email if you want to follow me along. Of course, I'm doing all kinds of crazy things all the time and trying to show what I can to the world.
Yeah.
Hey, Nicole, this is Katie. I just wanted to say that this was an amazing presentation. It's very far from the work that I do, and but it's inspiring. It's really super cool. It reminds me so much of the Mary Knowles sculptures.
Oh, I love her. If somebody considered me the witch of Port Washington Point, I would die, you know.
Yeah, I was just like, oh my gosh, she's like Mary Knowles. But no, it's awesome. I dig it totally. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you all for joining us. Again, this was our third installation of Friday Art Lunch Bunch, and I hope the recording worked this time. Nicole, thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart for joining us. The presentation was wonderful, and I really look forward to showing with you, Katie, in the near future. And Angie, thanks. Jesse, thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next Friday. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.